everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Heather. I hope this video finds you doing well. Today I want to share my top 10 reads of 2024. I know I'm running a bit behind with this one. I wanted to get my winter books by the decade video out before winter was actually over. So I went ahead and did that one first, and then I decided to do this, especially since it's still January, so it still counts. Actually, this video will probably come out on February 1st, now that I think of it, but I am recording this on January 24th. I have a cup of Earl Grey here that's calling my name. It has been so cold here that I can write messages on the windows in the morning because the frost is just so intense on the windows. I think we got into the negatives actually a couple of days, and I actually kind of love it when it gets that cold. It's just more reason to curl up and be cozy with a book. So before I get started with my top 10, I want to also share some other books that were runners up that were so difficult to leave off of the top 10 list, and so I just feel like I had to mention it. We had such a lovely, amazing reading year. And we also reread a few favorites. We reread Pinocchio, Peter Pan, Journey to the River Sea, and I reread The Hobbit. It was my son's first time reading The Hobbit, and it ended up being his favorite book of the year. Well, I'm going to take a sip of my tea and get started. I hope that you have something warm to cozy up with as well. And so let's have a sip and we'll get started. So starting with contemporary middle grade, books that I wanted to mention that were amazing reads for me as well is The Whisperwicks, The Labyrinth of Lost and Found by Jordan Lees. This one's a gorgeous one, and it has wonderful illustrations as well, but I really enjoyed this one. The other contemporary middle grade that we read is Da Vinci's Cat by Catherine Gilbert Murdoch, and she's the author of The Book of Boy, which I have not read yet, but I look forward to reading this year now that I've read Da Vinci's Cat, and we just really enjoyed it. It's a wonderful time slip novel, historical fiction. We had a good time with it, so I had to mention this one. It also has some cute chapter heading illustrations. A couple of more vintage middle grade books that I wanted to mention. One was from Purple House Press, The Diamond in the Window by Jane Langton. I really enjoyed this one. I thought it was so different from anything I had read. It's set in Concord, Massachusetts. There's a lot about Little Women and Orchard House and Henry David Thoreau and Ralph Waldo Emerson. And there's a lot of history around it, but it was a rather interesting read, so I definitely enjoyed this and wanted to mention it. And then the last middle grade book that I wanted to mention was actually part of my out of print series that I do on my Instagram account. I picked it up thinking it was out of print. I read it, and as I was writing, I somehow figured out that it's actually still in print. But anyway, that is The Lion's Paw. And we just had such a good time with this. I'm actually going to talk about this in my next video. And it was very difficult to leave this one out, especially because I really, really, really enjoyed this one. I have a couple of YA novels that I want to mention, and this one I'm not really sure if it's exactly YA. It might still be middle grade, but it's The Dragonfly Pool by Eva Ibbotson. I love her books. All the books I've read so far I've just loved, and Dragonfly Pool was no exception. Really good. Cold Moons by Erin Clement was a book that I read when I was probably about 15 years old, and it's really stayed with me. And so I finally decided to pick it up again this year and read it, and I really liked it. It was rather exciting and harsh and a little gritty sometimes. There's a little bit of death, but it was a really good book, I felt. Then there's one classic I have to mention, and that is Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island. This one is illustrated by Robert Ingpen, and I just love this book so much. I did not expect to like it as much as I did. It was quite a surprise, and it would definitely be on this list if I hadn't had so many other amazing books that we read this year as well. And then I have some modern classics that I wanted to quickly mention that I read that I really loved. One of them was by Purple House Press as well. It's Gene Stratton Porter's Keeper of the Bees, and this is a really pretty version. Let me show you a couple of the interior. Just some beautiful illustrations in the beginning. It was a wonderful read that just made me happy. I thought it was rather exciting too. A Room with a View by E.M. Forster. Really loved this book. Another one that was really difficult to leave off of my top 10 list. Yeah, it was romantic and exciting and set in Italy, or partially set in Italy. And I love the descriptions. The final book I want to mention that I read this year that was also very, very difficult to leave off of this list, it was so hard, was China Court by Rumer Godden. And I have this beautiful version by Manderley Press. They were so wonderful and offered a book giveaway this year for me, and it made me feel so happy that a publisher offered my subscribers a book giveaway. So that was pretty fun. But this was wonderful. I really need to reread it because I think the first time I was just trying to get to know who was who, and I think I missed a lot, so I feel like now I need to go back and reread it just to absorb all the beautiful description and the description of the house. I really like this. I thought it was really good. Okay, that's it for my honorable mentions. Now let me get started with my top 10. My number 10 is Daisy Miller by Henry James. I read these both about the same time, and if you had asked me right after reading them which one I preferred, I definitely would have said A Room with a View. But as the year went by, I found that Daisy Miller actually stuck with me a lot more. We have a young American girl, Daisy, who's been raised in America, and she is traveling through Europe with her mom and her younger brother. She meets a Mr. Winterbourne, who is also an American, but he's been raised in Europe. He's kind of fascinated with Daisy. She's attractive. She's also very straightforward. Her manners are a lot different than those of polite society in Europe. Mr. Winterbourne and Daisy go on a day trip out to the Chateau de Chillon. They're in Switzerland at the moment, in Vevey, Switzerland. They have a wonderful day. Daisy and her mother and her younger brother continue their travels, and they move on to Rome. And Mr. Winterbourne, after some time, comes to meet them in Rome, and he finds that Daisy has formed new friendships, and especially with one person in particular. And it's really a look at what happens when you bend the rules of society, when you don't follow the rules exactly. It's also a look at innocence versus experience. Daisy is a very naive person, and I also sometimes did struggle with trying to understand her motivations and the motivations of her mother as well. But still, I rather liked it when enough time had passed and it just stayed with me and caused me to think about it more and more. There's some wonderful tidbits of history, some modern history having to do with the Colosseum that I found interesting. I found this really pretty little version from Seawolf Press. It's just a paperback version, and it has a nice picture of Henry James on the back. And it's illustrated. Here's the Chateau de Chillon. Here's another one, a full-page illustration. Some of these illustrations in here feel like they're more just general illustrations that were found that fit with the text. It says it's illustrated from drawings by Harry W. McVicker. So I think it was just pulled from some of his drawings, but it's still a wonderful, delightful version, and I love this cover. So yeah, that's my number 10. Daisy Miller by Henry James. I only have one contemporary middle grade on this list, and that is Scary Stories for Young Foxes, coming in at number 9. This was such a good book, but unfortunately I really can't tell you anything about it, because if I do, it will ruin it for you. My only advice is don't check out reviews on Goodreads or any other thing. Go into it like we did, not knowing anything about it, because it has some really wonderfully shocking parts of the story, and you'll know what I mean when you read it, but I just can't tell you anything more. But it is about some foxes that are having bedtime stories told to them. That's how it starts out. And yeah, I don't want to say anything more, but it is hands down, just trust me on this, one of the best middle grade, contemporary middle grade books that I have read, maybe ever. It's so good. And they have another one out, Scary Stories for Young Foxes in the City. So I want to get that one next. We read this around Halloween, so we'll probably save the next one for around Halloween this year. But yeah, Scary Stories for Young Foxes, really good. It's by Christian McKay Heidecker. And I just want to show you a couple of the illustrations by Junyi Wu. And here's a couple of the illustrations for you. Yeah, so it's just really cool. But yeah, trust me on this. Such a good book. Number 8 is a book that I read just this past holiday season, and it is The Flying Classroom by Eric Kessner. I had shown you guys this book in one of my videos, and I told you that it wasn't quite working for my son, and so I took it aside and read it to myself. It is so good. I can't even begin to tell you how much I love this book. It was funny. It says wise and generous on the cover, and that is it. It really is wise and generous. It was just such a treat. It's set in Germany in the interwar years, and it's a group of boys in a boarding school. It begins with one of the boys climbing on the outside of the schoolhouse and coming in through a window. There's tons of snow, and it's definitely a wintertime read. The Flying Classroom is a play that the boys are putting on right before they all depart for December holidays. And the Flying Classroom itself is a little bit like the Magic School Bus. It's a classroom that flies around to different places and where you learn your lesson on the spot. So they go to Mount Vesuvius, and they talk about Pompeii and Herculaneum, and then they fly to Egypt and talk a little bit about the pyramids. I mean, this is all in the play. But the play itself actually doesn't play that much of a role in the story. It's really about these boys and their friendships and their loyalties and how they care for each other, and how every kid has things they're good at and things they're not good at, and it's just accepted. That's just how they are, and it has some really funny moments. The last time I laughed as hard as this was when I read Just William. I actually think this might be a little bit funnier, or at least this one matches my humor a little bit more. I still have my tabs on it because I haven't done my Goodreads review yet. I really enjoyed this one. So that is number 8, The Flying Classroom. My number 7 read is the only YA novel I think that I have on this list, and it's a modern classic, and it's The Hero and the Crown by Robin McKinley. When I closed this book, I missed it. I very soon missed the characters. I feel like Robin McKinley's strengths are in her writing of characters. She always writes such strong women, but also worthy men, characters that you really come to love and care about, so much so that when you close it, you really miss them like they were your friends. And that's what I would say is one of my favorite things about this book. Erin is a king's daughter, and her mother was rumored to have been a witch. And they live in a kingdom that is plagued by dragons. And through book learning and trial and error, Erin figures out how to make this balm that you can spread over yourself that protects you from dragon's fire. And then she sets out to save towns from the threat of dragons. There's a little romance in it. There's a hint of a love triangle, but it's really not centered on the romance. In fact, the best relationship in here is the relationship that Erin has with her horse, Talat. I loved that part as well. I thought it was fantastic. And I want to read more. I want to read The Blue Sword, which I think is a precursor to this book. I think The Blue Sword was the Newbery Honor in, I want to say 1983, and this one was 1985. Just a world that I would really like to revisit again. I really enjoyed my time in this book. So yes, number 7, The Hero and the Crown. Annie by Thomas Meehan. Annie was a comic strip in the 20s, and then Thomas Meehan turned it into a Broadway musical as well as a novel. And the novelization is just wonderful. My son and I both loved it. This is one that is on his top 10 list as well. And I did not realize what a wonderful book it was to read around Christmas time. We follow Annie, and she's an orphan, and the book begins with her sitting at the window looking out on snowy New York. It's New Year's Eve. She's waiting for her parents, hoping her parents will show up. She decides that she's had enough one day, and she decides to run away, and actually succeeds for quite a few months. She's out on the road, and we enter worlds that we don't see in the movie during this period. Eventually, Mrs. Hannigan finds her, and just at the time when she's in the office getting reprimanded, a very wealthy man who is referred to as Daddy Warbucks, his secretary is there, and she would like to adopt an orphan in order to improve Daddy Warbucks's image. And Annie's there, and of course she gets chosen. It's a really wonderful look into the world of the Great Depression in New York. We visit shanty towns. I think the name of the shanty town that we visit is Hooverville. This one has illustrations by Julia Noonan. There's one of them right there. And it also has some black and white illustrations. I wanted to read a quick part that I thought was very, very cute. School days were happier for Annie than the days spent at her sewing machine, but not much happier. Still, at school she had a chance to read, which was her favorite pastime. Annie eagerly read her way through scores of books each year. The books she loved best, like The Five Little Peppers, were about poor but happy children and cheerful families. And there's also reference to Heidi as well in this book. But yes, that is my number 6, Annie. Number 5 on this list is Pollyanna by Eleanor H. Porter. And I have this version published by Alma Publishing, and it's illustrated by Kate Hindley, who has very cute illustrations on each chapter. I am so happy that I finally read Pollyanna. My son and I read it together, and he loved it. He adored it, by the way. It has long been on my TBR, and I love the characters. I love Pollyanna's positive attitude. There were emotionally complex situations between adults that also really makes it fun for adults to read. And in our case, I'm really glad that I waited for my son to be a little bit older, because I'm not sure he would have got them if we had read Pollyanna earlier. Pollyanna is an orphan. Her father has recently passed away, but nevertheless, she is a ball of optimism because her father taught her to play the glad game whenever she feels down. And Pollyanna is sent to live with her Aunt Polly in a small town in Vermont. And she arrives at the train station wearing a red checkered dress and a straw hat. And it's apparent from the very beginning that she is going to make a difference in this community, but we're not sure how yet. And it's just a lovely read. I recommend it. And I love this cute little version. It's a great one for summertime too. I think it begins in June, if I'm not mistaken. Pollyanna, number 5. Number 4 is A Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett. A Little Princess is a rags to riches story with a little revenge thrown in for extra spice. I love that one of the references in here is the Count of Monte Cristo. It made me smile so much, and it's just a wonderful book. It's a really interesting study of how you're treated when you're poor versus when you're wealthy. I think the message is, if you remain polite and kind, but yet still stand up for yourself during times of trial, you will triumph. I loved it. My son loved it. It takes place over a number of years, but there's much mention of cold weather, fireplace coats, and other warm things. So it's kind of a nice book I think to read late autumn, maybe winter. I'm not really sure, but we read it in the late autumn. It's the 3rd book that we've read by Frances Hodgson Burnett. We've read The Secret Garden, and we also read, last year we read The Lost Prince as well. And I have such a huge regret, because I really should have put this one on my top 10 list when I did my top 10 reads of 2023. And I didn't. I forgot about it at that moment when I was doing the planning. But it was a good one. We really enjoyed this one. I will talk about it in a video someday. But yeah, so we just loved The Little Princess. I highly recommend it. It's set in London, but there's much mention of India, and there's also some mention of Russia and Paris. We follow Sarah. Sarah is being dropped off at a boarding school. She's from India, and she's with her father, and he's dropping her off at Miss Minchin's boarding school. They say goodbye. You can tell how much love there is between Sarah and her father. They're very close. While her father's away, some unfortunate events occur, and Sarah loses all her money. She's no longer treated well in her school. She is sent up to an attic, a very cold, drafty attic with mice or rats that run around. Everything is looking rather dreary until one day there is a monkey on her skylight window. She has a little skylight, and this monkey shows up. Then the story begins to take a different turn. But it's just a wonderful, wonderful read. I really enjoyed it. Number 4, A Little Princess. Now we're getting to our top 3 reads, and my number 3 is The Scarlet Pimpernel by Baroness Orczy. And this was my late stepfather's favorite book, or one of his favorite books. He used to love this story, and I kept meaning to read it, and I'm so glad that I finally read it this past year. It was such a wonderful read. I read it for February of last year. I wanted a romantic classic, and it was just wonderful. We have our very first superhero trope. We have the masked hero, we have the lady love, we have the arch nemesis in Chauvelin. We are in France in the middle of the French Revolution, and amongst all that death, some people are escaping, and they're escaping with the help of the Scarlet Pimpernel and his friends. And we don't know who is the Scarlet Pimpernel. At the same time, we have this wonderful love story between a married couple. We have Marguerite and a wealthy English baronet, Sir Percy Blakeney. And Sir Percy has come to believe that Marguerite has done something just really terrible. It's a mistake, but he doesn't know it. And Marguerite is also being blackmailed and cannot confide in Sir Percy. And so there's this rift between them and a lack of understanding. And it's really wonderful to see how things turn out. I was very impressed with the ending of this book, which I thought was very clever of Baroness Orczy. It was just a beautiful, really cleverly executed ending. I love this edition by H.M. Brock. I have been looking for it everywhere. This is actually a library copy. It's my favorite one. It's the one I read. I love the classic illustrations. And also I love that there's a picture of Baroness Orczy on the back. Here's one of his illustrations. H.M. Brock, I spoke about him a little bit in one of my Jane Austen videos. He's a wonderful illustrator. He and his brother, C.E. Brock. But yeah, so I'm on the lookout for this one. It's on my to-be-bought pile. And I have another one by the Folio Society that a friend of mine found in a Goodwill shop and picked up for me. And I really like this one too. If you haven't read The Scarlet Pimpernel, I recommend it. And there are many, many Scarlet Pimpernel books. And I think I'm going to go for El Dorado next, which I believe is number 4. If I'm wrong, I'll put it on the screen. Because the movie that I love with Jane Seymour is based on the first book and El Dorado. I wanted to tell you, when I was researching, I came across the information that I thought was so funny, and it was that the actor who played Percy Blakeney, Sir Percy Blakeney, in the Scarlet Pimpernel theatrical productions, who was really well known for his role as Sir Percy Blakeney, is Douglas Sills. And Douglas Sills is actually the chef on The Gilded Age. He plays the French chef. And I just thought that was really funny, especially if you know the story. But anyway, The Scarlet Pimpernel, number 3. Now we've gotten to my second runner-up, and that is The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte. And I'm cheating a little bit on this one because I actually just finished this one about a week ago. And it was wonderful. I really enjoyed it. It's an epistolary novel, a nested epistolary novel. It starts off with a man writing a letter to a friend, and in it he describes reading a journal. So it's very unique. It's a very interesting way to take in a book. We have an empty house that has just been rented out to a very mysterious tenant, a beautiful woman with a young boy. Who she is, where she comes from is a complete mystery. She keeps to herself a lot. She does attend some social events, but really she's kind of a bit standoffish, and she doesn't get very intimate with anybody. And because of this, some people begin to gossip about her and to begin to think the worst of her. Even though she hasn't really grown close to anybody, she does get close to a man named Gilbert. And Gilbert begins to have feelings for her, and she cannot be with him. She cannot return the feelings, not because she doesn't return them, but because she can't return them. And he wants to know why, so she hands him her journal, and he reads her journal. And in this journal, we follow Helen as a young girl, and she meets a man, and against all advice, marries a man that is, and I hate to use the term, but is basically a narcissist. He's an alcoholic. And marriage with him is not fun. It's not great. She eventually decides that she has to run away because of how he's corrupting her son. What I loved about this book is that Anne Bronte really understands narcissism. She understands how they're created, and she understands the effect that the raising of boys at the time versus raising girls at the time, how it creates certain types of men. And also what struck me so much about this book on that note is how much I wish this was read more widely by younger people. It might save quite a few mistakes that could possibly be made. And in fact, Anne wrote about that. That was actually her wish when she wrote her introduction. When she wrote her preface to the second edition. She wrote, "And if I have warned one rash youth from following in their steps, or prevented one thoughtless girl from falling into the very natural error of my heroine, this book has not been written in vain." And that's Anne Bronte's own words from the preface to her second edition. The other thing that struck me is how much she knows about marriage and children and relationships and alcoholism. And when I was reading it, I kept thinking, wow, she really knows a lot for someone who never married, never had children. But then I realized that Anne Bronte was a governess. And then also I realized that so much of her brother Branwell is in this book. Her brother was an alcoholic and definitely dragged the family down with him. He is so much in this book in more ways than just the alcoholism. I think you see it in Jane Eyre as well. Branwell was an artist, and both heroines in Jane Eyre as well as the Tenant of Wildfell Hall paint and draw. The writing itself is spectacular. There's a line from Shakespeare from Twelfth Night, from Orsino to Viola, that is such a mirror for the content of the novel. For those of you who like to read seasonally, this actually turns out to be a wonderful book to read in December. The final 3 chapters occur in December, and a couple of the closing scenes are affected by a heavy snowfall. And so I thought that was really lovely. But there's also beautiful springtime description as well throughout. And she writes a lot about the flowers. Last year for the holidays, I think it was, I received a gift card to the Folio Society. So I bought this year and I really love it. And Tracy Chevalier has an introduction to it, which I found really interesting. And one of the things that she was talking about is how she had to go work at the Bronte parsonage for a short time. And when she was there, she came across Charlotte's and she came across Emily's, Team Emily, Team Charlotte's, but no one was Team Anne. And she poses the question, why is that? Why is the Tenant of Wildfell Hall, as good as it is, not as well known as Jane Eyre or Wuthering Heights? And the answer to it might lie in the fact that after Anne passed away, Charlotte Bronte actually suppressed the publication of The Tenant of Wildfell Hall because it had a lot of personal ties, because so much of Branwell was in this book. For some reason or another, Charlotte Bronte just felt that it wasn't true to the character of Anne. I think she said it should never have been written. It would be better if it had never been written. But before Charlotte Bronte prevented its publication, this was a really popular novel. Within the first year of publication, it had 2 editions, and it was really doing well. It's considered one of the earliest feminist novels, and it's not only that, but I also think it tackled so many other issues relating to how to raise children as well. Unfortunately, when Charlotte Bronte suppressed its publication, it was in the height of its prime, and it went 10 years without being published, and I think that really slowed it down. And it just kind of fell in the shadows behind Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights, unfortunately. But it is a really good book. I really enjoyed it. Jane Eyre is still my favorite, but I really love The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. It was really good. I love this Folio Society version. It's illustrated by Valentina Catto, an Italian illustrator. And I just want to show you one of her works. So pretty. I just love it. Number 2, The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. And my number 1 favorite book of 2024 is The Great Gatsby. And I have this Beehive Books edition with this beautiful gold slipcase, which always kind of makes me a little embarrassed to hold it up because it's just too beautiful. It feels like I'm flaunting my beautiful book, and I'm sorry. It was a gift. My husband bought this for me the year it came out. I think it was a Valentine's Day gift. Whenever somebody asks me what I want, I just say, a book. And if it's my husband, I say, a pretty book. So that's what I get. So anyway, yeah, but I do kind of always feel a little embarrassed when I hold this up because it's just so beautiful. But anyway, so Beehive Books. This is illustrated by Anna and Elena Balbuso. These Italian twins, the Balbuso twins, and I talk about them a lot because I love their stuff. But yeah, so anyway, wow, what a story. Okay. Wow, because when I read this in high school, I did not have this experience, and I think that is the point. I think that Fitzgerald, one of the very first things he means for you to understand is that whatever age you are, whatever stage of your life you're in, your background is going to change your perspective of this story and your judgment of the characters. Let me read the first line to you just to remind you. I know I did it in another one of my videos, but I'm going to do it again. In my younger and more vulnerable years, my father gave me some advice that I've been turning over in my mind ever since. Whenever you feel like criticizing anyone, he told me, just remember that all the people in this world haven't had the advantages that you've had. And whether it's the first line in this book or Dr. Eckelberg's billboard, your judgment of this story will depend on what you bring to it. And I know that that is true for many, many classics, well-written classics, but what's different is that Fitzgerald acknowledges that. He makes it known to you right off the bat. And he reminds you of it with the billboard, with the eyes. And by the way, I love this cover that the Balbuso twins did that echoes the Francis Kruget's cover on the original edition. It's called The Celestial Eyes. It came out in 1925. But I like what they did with it. It's a flapper, a woman's eyes, and then there's the green light. These symbols are almost as if Fitzgerald is handing you the keys and giving you what you need to enter this world when he gives you that first line. When you read the whole book with that first line in mind and you remember it throughout the whole book, it really just hits you in such a way that makes this such a phenomenal read. It's as if you're about to enter a tale from Greek mythology. And when I closed it, I felt like I had been amongst the gods. The writing was so beautiful. It was the most beautiful, useful writing I've ever seen. Poetry and prose. And it was, wow, I cannot believe that I went so long and didn't read this book since high school. We have Gatsby. And Gatsby fell in love with a girl named Daisy when they were young. He was taken off to fight in the war. And when he returned, Daisy was married. And she's very wealthy now. She's living in East Egg, which is a very wealthy area of Long Island. He, in order to attain her, has to be just as wealthy. So he strives for riches. He attains his wealth. He buys a home right across the river from where Daisy's living and comes outside every now and then to watch a green light, which is the dock light of Daisy's home. Nick Carraway enters the picture. He is actually Daisy's cousin, as we come to find out. But he moves in to a small little house next to Gatsby's mansion. Gatsby throws these immaculate parties, all in the hopes of attracting Daisy to his house so he can run into her again. But nothing works. She doesn't come to any of these parties. So he arranges for Nick Carraway to arrange a meeting between him and Daisy. This story is a tragedy. It is a hard look at the American dream, a hard look at wealth versus poverty, and the characters are just phenomenal. I mean, Gatsby himself is this character that you don't know if you should feel sorry for him or if you should admire him. And Daisy, I just could not stand her character. I despised her. But when you read the book, you understand her motivations better and you understand where she's coming from, how she knows the dangers of being put on a pedestal. And what I also find amazing about this book, the symbolism is just fantastic. Even her name, Daisy, belongs to the family Asteraceae. And Aster is Latin for star. So when Gatsby is reaching for Daisy, he is reaching for the stars, trying to recapture the past and recreate what once was. And then, of course, the flashing green light could also mean the color of money. You know, it's green, it's wealth, it's money. Here's a picture to illustrate what I was talking about, how you have Gatsby and Daisy and the light, remarkable illustrations. Wow, it was just amazing. Like I said, when I shut this book on the last page, I really felt like I had been walking amongst the gods. This was such a beautiful, amazing read, and I'm not usually one who goes for tragedies, although it's kind of funny that this year, two of my favorite reads both have Daisy in them, and both are tragedies. This edition with the wonderful illustrations of Anna and Elena Balbuso was just such a remarkable experience as well. Well, that is it. I hope you've enjoyed this sharing of my favorite reads of 2024. I'd love to know in the comments what your favorite books of last year were, or if you've read any of these books, what your thoughts on these books are. I also want to thank you guys so much for watching my videos and viewing my videos, especially to everyone who's commenting as well and liking. It really helps. I will be back soon with another video, and until then, if you're in the northern hemisphere, I hope you're not too cold, and if you're in the southern hemisphere, that you're not too hot. And I'll be back soon, and I'll see you then. Bye!